There are over 2.5 million different types of living things so far. Why so far? Because biologists estimate that there may be millions of other living organisms waiting to be discovered and classified. The system we use for classifying living things is a combination of older ideas about classification and information discovered with new technologies. The Greek philosopher Aristotle devised a system in the 4th century BC that divided organisms into two groups, plants and animals. So far, so good. But Aristotle got in trouble when he divided animals into 3 subgroups: animals that flew, swam, and walked. According to Aristotle's classification system, both birds and bats are flying animals, even though in many ways they are very different. Birds, for example, have feathers, while bats have fur. Today, we know that bats are mammals. But Aristotle was on the right track, and his system was used for about 2,000 years. Building on the work of Aristotle, an 18th century Swedish scientist by the name of Carolus Linnaeus developed the system we use today. A system of groups within larger groups, within still larger groups. But a lot has changed in the past 200 years. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution showed us that new kinds of organisms develop from previously existing organisms. And new technologies allow scientists to study and examine organisms in ways never before possible. The modern classification system does 2 jobs. It gives each organism a unique name that scientists all over the world can use and understand. And it groups organisms according to basic characteristics that reflect their evolutionary relationships. All living things are classified into 7 major groups: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. To understand how this system works, let's classify the lion. Lions belong to the kingdom Animalia, but so do all other animals, including insects and fish. The second largest classification group is the phylum. As a member of the phylum Chordata, the lion is still grouped with some very different animals, over 42,000 species, but they share some important characteristics, like a single hollow nerve cord that members of other phyla do not. Birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, and mammals are all chordates, but notice that insects are not. The next largest classification group is the class, and lions are one of just 4,500 species in the class Mammalia. Since one characteristic of mammals is the presence of hair during at least part of their life cycle, birds have flown the group. What about bats? The next group in the modern classification system is order. As a member of the order Carnivora, the lion is distinguished as a meat eater, but some of his fellow mammals are obviously vegetarians. The next classification group is the family, and lions are members of the family Felidae, or cat family. Notice that we've lost some carnivores with this classification. Next, the lion belongs to the genus Panthera, which rules out cats that purr and includes cats that roar. Exit house cats. Finally, we are down to the smallest and most specific group in the classification system, species. Members of the same species share many characteristics and are similar to one another in appearance and behavior. The species name for a lion of the genus Panthera is Leo. The lion's scientific name is Panthera leo, a combination of its genus name and species name. Now consider this. Humans are in the animal kingdom with lions. At what classification level do we go our separate ways, and why?
The single biggest threat to man's continued dominance on the planet is the virus.
These are the words of Nobel Prize-winning scientist Joshua Lederberg. And if you doubt what he says, have we got a murder mystery for you? A true story that sent shivers around the entire world.
It began in the African rainforest, where there is a predator on the prowl.
The killer is a virus that causes a painful death in 8 of every 10 victims.
When an outbreak of the disease struck a small village in 1995, a frenzy of fear engulfed Central Africa, and for good reason.
Before the killer's reign of terror ended, 245 people had lost their lives.
A similar outbreak had wiped out a village of 300 some 20 years earlier. Once identified, the virus was named after the river that ran through the village, Ebola. Could the two outbreaks be related?
To identify the killer, victims' blood samples were sent to the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, where suspicions were soon confirmed. The Ebola virus had returned.
Once the disease had been identified, scientific and medical teams from around the world rushed to the scene.
It was a race against time to track the killer down before more people died.
Since the disease had spread to neighboring villages, international scientific investigative teams fanned out. Their mission was to identify and isolate Ebola cases, educate the villagers about the disease, and find patient zero, the first person to be infected.
Finding patient zero might pinpoint the killer's hunting ground and lead to its hiding place.
Finally, their detective work paid off. Patient zero turned out to be a 35-year-old charcoal maker.
This trail in the rainforest, the one patient zero took to work each day, became the focus of the hunt for the virus.
Did the killer leave behind clues? A new team of scientists was sent into the rainforest to find out.
There was a very real danger that the hunters could have turned into the hunted and become victims themselves.
To find out where the virus came from and where it hides between epidemics, hundreds of traps were set to collect animals and insects that might be carriers of the virus.
Among the prime suspects were bats, since they had been associated with previous Ebola outbreaks.
20,000 blood and tissue samples from possible carriers were collected and shipped to the Center for Disease Control.
Researchers in Atlanta completed their study of the samples in search of the disease carrier. However, the carrier of the Ebola virus still remains a mystery.
Today, natives are once again penetrating deeper and deeper into the rainforest, searching for wood and food and clearing land for crops.
As the rainforest is chopped down, weeds take over, providing cover for an increasing rodent population. Rodents, like bats, are key suspects as carriers of the Ebola virus.
The villagers are unaware that they are changing the ecological balance in their environment, and unaware that they may be aiding and abetting a killer.
It's a problem that's not limited to the rainforest. As humans around the world change the ecological balance of our planet, we leave ourselves open to new viruses and other disease agents that we have never before encountered.
Although Ebola outbreaks have been contained, a new one could occur at any time. Scientists are certain that the Ebola virus will emerge again someday. They just don't know where or when.
Ring-a-ring-a-rosy, pocket full of posies. At you, we all fall down.
A children's rhyme we all grew up with. But if the words seem a little odd, it's because this is the original 18th century version, and it's associated with a terrible event, the bubonic plague. In a time when even simple bacterial infections were fatal, the plague wiped out a third of Europe's population. To children, the rosy ring was a telltale rash. Posies were herbs and spices carried to ward off disease and to hide the smell of dead and decaying bodies. And sneezes were one of the first symptoms of the deadly bacterial infection known as the plague. Since the development of vaccines and antibiotics, many deadly and crippling diseases have become distant memories. Polio, a viral infection of the central nervous system, is an example of a disease that is now just a memory thanks to the development of a vaccine. Polio is caused by a virus that enters the system through the nose or mouth. It attacks the nerves that control muscles and can lead to paralysis. A polio epidemic hit the United States in the early 1950s. Frightened parents kept their children inside, safe from contact with other children who might be carrying the virus. Fortunately, Dr. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine made of killed polioviruses. When injected into the body, the vaccine stimulates the immune system to produce antibodies. These antibodies are then able to destroy the virus and provide immunity to polio. A few years later, a more convenient oral polio vaccine made of live but weakened viruses brought the disease further under control. But the effects on those who contracted polio were lasting, and its most famous victim, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would use a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Today, we take vaccines and antibiotics for granted. But the power of antibiotics is fading, and deadly bacterial infections are staging a menacing comeback. Bacteria that survived penicillin and other antibiotics have produced new generations of drug-resistant bacteria. How did this happen? When bacteria invade your body, the body's immune system fights back, but sometimes your body needs help. Doctors prescribe antibiotics to kill the invading bacteria and make you well again. A doctor's prescription includes specific directions for taking the antibiotic, how much to take, when to take it, and how long to take it. If the antibiotic is not taken according to the prescription, it may not kill all the bacteria. A few may survive. These survivor bacteria then produce offspring that are resistant to that particular antibiotic, and another antibiotic will be required to kill them. In this high-stakes game, bacteria are evolving and changing faster than we are currently able to develop new antibiotics. Until recently, new antibiotics were discovered and put into use on a regular basis, but by the 1990s, the number of new antibiotics under development had declined. Assuming the war against bacteria had been won, drug companies began directing their research toward more profitable areas. Only now are medical researchers beginning to refocus their attention on the development and production of new antibiotics, but it will be years before most are available. To make matters worse, modern society has developed a dangerous tendency to overuse antibiotics. The more antibiotics are used, the more likely it is that some bacteria will survive and become resistant to them. So far, we've been lucky. Except for a few hotspots, resistant bacteria have not become common. To keep it that way, we have to change our attitude about using antibiotics, pay strict attention to prescription directions, and reinforce our efforts to create new antibiotics. One effort to discover a new generation of antibiotics has taken Australian scientists to a part of the world once considered sterile, Antarctica. They've discovered that the gravelly soil and frozen waters of Antarctica are home to thousands of species of bacteria not found anywhere else in the world. In fact, a fraction of an ounce of Antarctic gravel contains 1 million bacteria. Someday, one of them may help us learn to provide protection from disease for a new generation of children.
We all fall down.
It may not be pretty, and it may not smell so hot, but sewage is an essential part of our lives. Here at the wastewater treatment plant in East Norwalk, Connecticut, Fred Treffiason is responsible for everything that gets washed, drained, rinsed, and flushed into city sewers by over 80,000 people in the surrounding communities. That's over 15 million gallons of sewage a day.
This is the raw wastewater as it comes in. Remember what that looks like, because when we get to the end, you'll see how much we actually take out.
The treated sewage, called effluent, ends up here in the Norwalk River. To be released, it has to be clean enough not to upset the delicate ecosystems in and around the river. That means removing all the dissolved and undissolved materials that end up in the wastewater. The cone on the left is the raw wastewater that comes into the plant.
You can see how turbid it is. There's lots of dissolved inorganic solids, as well as the sludge on the bottom.
The sewage treatment plant's job is to get all the potentially dangerous materials out of the water. Let's see how it happens. After large debris is screened out, sewage moves quickly through flumes, where the flow is measured. It is then pumped up from these wells into this station, where it moves slowly through large outdoor tanks.
Now, this is called primary treatment. And all that's really happening here is the flow is slowing down to such a speed that anything that will settle out settles out to the bottom and is picked up by the slow-moving flights are scraping along the bottom, and they pick up the sludge. On the surface, they're skimming the grease over to one section. We'll collect this grease and we'll skim that off and remove that separately.
While undissolved solids and liquids are easily removed from the mixture, the solution that's left contains solutes that won't settle out, no matter how long you let them sit.
After settling out all the solids, you can see on the bottom there's no longer the sludge, but they're still very turbid, which means it still contains a high amount of the dissolved organic solids.
Many of these solids are nutrients like nitrates, which can have a devastating effect on the environment if not adequately removed. Nutrient-rich effluent can lead to an explosion of algae growth and a condition called hypoxia. Hypoxia happens when there is so much algae that the supply of dissolved oxygen in the water is depleted, threatening the lives of organisms living in and around the water. Do you have any ideas on how these dissolved nutrients might be safely and economically removed from the water?
After primary treatment, you'll see a quality of water that's very turbid. The solids are in the water, but it's very hard to get out. No matter how much time you give them, they'll still stay dissolved into the water, much like sugar in water.
Since the solids that are left are mostly organic, they can be broken down by the oldest forms of life on Earth, bacteria. So the secondary treatment of the sewage is a biological process in which bacteria feed on the dissolved nutrients.
These bugs eat the sewage, if you will, as food, and we provide air. So you have the bugs that are eating the food that's coming in and the air that's required to break down the food.
All Fred has to do is keep track of the dissolved oxygen in the water to make sure the bacteria have enough to stay alive while they eat up nutrients in the sewage. Bacteria are useful to us in many other ways as well. For example, modern biochemists and most other fields of biology owe a special thanks to bacteria and to the microbiologists who, 100 years ago, worked out the techniques for culturing them in the laboratory. Under laboratory conditions, bacteria will double their numbers every 30 minutes, making them ideally suited for experimental studies. Evolutionary biologists can use bacteria to follow changes through hundreds of generations, the equivalent of 20,000 years if humans were the subjects. Even ecologists have found that they can use bacteria to model the larger world. In this study, a single-cell predator is introduced into a population of paramecia. It attacks one, and in less than a minute, swallows it whole. By studying how these rapidly reproducing organisms interact, ecologists have developed theories about how predators and prey coexist. Perhaps the most positive contribution bacteria have made to the Earth is oxygen. Billions of years ago, blue-green bacteria used energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and water to make food. This process, called photosynthesis, produced an important byproduct, oxygen. Oxygen produced by blue-green bacteria helped change the composition of the atmosphere and allowed oxygen-breathing organisms to evolve. Because the few bacteria that cause trouble for humans get all the publicity, it's important to keep these tiny organisms in perspective. After all, the vast majority of bacteria are either helpful or harmless to us. If you even give algae a second thought, images of pond scum probably come to mind. But algae and fungi play bigger roles in our lives than we give them credit for. Algae in the form of seaweed are actually the beginning of a food chain that includes human beings. Some cultures have used seaweed as food for years, and a substance produced from seaweed is added to ice cream, jellies, and candies to give them a smooth texture. Algae is also used to make several other important products. These are ashes left after a certain kind of seaweed is burned. Further processing will yield a solution of iodine, an antiseptic used to prevent infection. And agar, a gelatin-like substance used in laboratories to grow bacteria cultures, is manufactured from certain types of red algae. Fungi consist of mushrooms, yeasts, and molds. They depend on other living things, or on living things that have died, like these rotting leaves, for food. By causing decay, fungi help to fertilize the soil and make the growth of plants possible. Of course, some fungi can be harmful. This bracket fungus draws its food from a living tree, killing the tree in the process. Microscopic fungi called molds can cause a variety of diseases in both plants and animals. Some can cause death, and we've all seen what mold can do to food. But molds are not always harmful. One type of mold that can grow on bread is called penicillium. Penicillium is used to make an antibiotic that has saved millions of lives, penicillin. The penicillium mold is also an important ingredient in blue cheese. In fact, the mold causes the dark spots that give the cheese its special flavor. Yeast is a fungus used in baking. As the yeast cells multiply, they produce carbon dioxide gas. millions of tiny carbon dioxide bubbles in the dough cause the bread to rise. Sometimes a fungus may live with another type of organism in a way that benefits both partners. The growth on this rock is called a lichen. It's a partnership between a fungus and an alga. Under a microscope, you can see the round cells of the alga that make food for both partners, and the long fungus cells that gather water and anchor the lichen to the rock. The partnership between algae and fungi works so well that lichens can flourish in places where other organisms have trouble surviving. As it grows, the lichen helps to break down rock to form soil. This new soil eventually makes it possible for plants to take root and grow. So algae and fungi, whether they form a partnership or live separately, are an important part of the circle of life.
Farming isn't exactly what it used to be. Satellite pictures and computer programs are the new tools of the trade. These tools enable farmers to map out their land by detailed soil analysis and provide fertilizer mixtures tailored to the specific needs of just about every square foot of soil. But even the most modern farming methods still rely on one constant: a knowledge of the essential nutrients that promote and support plant life. Every plant needs 16 nutrients, and all can be found listed in the periodic table. The three most important are oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen, all readily available to plants in air and water. The other 13 essential plant nutrients are obtained largely from the soil. These include nitrogen, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and phosphorus, plus 8 other trace elements. All of these elements occur naturally in the soil, but soil doesn't contain an unlimited supply of them. Repeated planting and harvesting permanently remove nutrients from the soil, creating the need to fertilize between plantings. If you look at a bag of commercial fertilizer, you'll usually see 3 numbers. These are the percentages of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, or NPK for short. Why do you suppose these 3 elements, not oxygen or carbon, are the building blocks of fertilizer? Carbon and oxygen are plentiful in the air in the form of carbon dioxide, and elements like calcium and magnesium are abundant in most soils. But most nitrogen found in the soil is not in a chemical form that can be used by plants. And the forms of phosphorus and potassium found in soil do not dissolve very well in water. So these 3 elements must be reintroduced to the soil in a form that plants can use. Organic fertilizers like animal manures and decaying plant tissue are nature's source of NPK, but organic fertilizers contain only a small percentage of these 3 nutrients, so there isn't enough manure in the whole world to fertilize all the farmlands that need it. That's why inorganic fertilizers with a higher percentage of available NPK are processed and mass-produced. These chemicals are needed by plants. Nitrogen is a major constituent of amino acids, proteins, nucleic acids, and chlorophyll. It promotes plant growth and helps keep foliage green. Phosphorus is used to make DNA in all cells and is important in the development of roots and stems. Adequate phosphorus is also necessary for proper flowering and fruiting. Potassium is required to activate at least 60 different enzymes involved in plant growth. It also plays a major role in the transport of water and nutrients through the plant. It accumulates in the roots, helping draw water into them. Plants that are deficient in potassium don't absorb water as well and end up looking like this. Bad news for farmers in any era.
Head in the clouds? It's easy. If you're driving through the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, 50 to 60 inches of rain fall here every year. But finding a cloud for your head here in the desert of the Southwest is difficult. Only 3 to 5 inches of rainfall per year. Day after day of hot sun and temperatures over 100 degrees make the desert a tough environment for plants and present a challenge for landscape architects. Landscape architects develop designs for the outside of homes and buildings. They use plants to make a structure more attractive, but plants can also provide a home for animals in protection from the sun and wind. Melody Cavaneri is a resource specialist in the desert Southwest who works with people to develop landscape plans that make sense for a desert environment.
Because water is so scarce, it's important for the desert's human inhabitants to conserve whenever possible.
The term xeriscape derives from the Greek word xeris, which means dry.
In desert areas, it's appropriate to use native or drought-tolerant landscaping materials whenever possible. If you use materials that come from areas where there is a great deal of rainfall, they require a considerable amount of water. Lawns are a good example of this. They need to be watered almost year-round, and not only do they use a lot of water in terms of what they actually take up through their root system, but a lot of water is lost through evaporation to the air. A lot of trees need to be deep watered that aren't indigenous to the desert regions. Lots of perennials need to be coaxed along and require lots of water and a lot of effort on the part of the homeowner or landscaper. So the bottom line is that if you choose a drought-tolerant plant species, you'll use much less water, you'll have to expend much less energy, you'll get an equally appropriate and satisfying landscaping effect, and you'll also be conserving water. You'll be in tune with the desert environment.
Desert soil also presents a challenge to plant life. Desert soil is shallow, rocky, and alkaline. It also lacks fertile organic matter.
The plants of the Sonoran Desert are very opportunistic. They have to be able to make a living wherever they can in a harsh environment such as this. As you can see from the variety of plants around me, there's still quite a bit of diversity, even up here in the rocky area where I'm standing. You've got the brittle bush, you've got the creosote, you've got palo verde trees. Wherever there's a little bit of soil and a little bit of moisture collected, these plants are able to establish themselves and propagate. Plants such as the cholla are important to species such as the cactus wren, which uses it for nesting material. Indeed, it may often make its nest within the spiny branches, and also it makes use of the fruits during the springtime as a food source. The Sonoran Desert is host to a variety of plant species, from the majestic saguaro behind me, which can live for hundreds of years and is found only in the Sonoran Desert, to trees such as the palo verde with its unique green bark.
Native plants are the very best xeriscaping material, but a wide variety of drought-resistant trees, shrubs, and ground covers are also available to the landscape architect. While making the view around a house or business a beautiful one, xeriscapes represent a more responsible use for a resource that is growing more precious each day.